All right, we are back. That was a little music interlude. But this is where I sort of disagree with Byung-Chul Han. This is where he might have a little cringe blue normie pill take, a blue pilled take, if you will. But we'll see. I'll try to save him. So, but going along with digital communities. So here he says, digital communication redirects information flows in a way that undermines the democratic process. Information is distributed without passing through public spaces. It is produced in private spaces and is sent to private spaces. Social media intensifies communication with a community. Digital communities are commodified forms of community. In reality, they are commodities. They are incapable of acting politically. Well, he's kind of wrong with that. He's kind of wrong there, a little bit. They can act politically, but the way in which they act politically does not become immediately apparent on the sight of it. It percolates and bubbles up over time through a vast array of egregoric cultural diffusion, as I would say. The various egregores and tulpas that we unleash today have real-world implications for politics tomorrow. But he's like, I hate to say that Byung-Chul Han is boomer posting here, but we'll see where he goes. Exciting play. We'll see what happens here. See if it pays off. Digital networks, but then of course he's reifying democracy. He's saying true democracy through communicative action is being undermined by these rebel communities and these, trolls and people that don't have the democratic interests in mind. But maybe internet posting, if it can destroy democracy, that's pretty based. That's, because maybe democracy, and the reason I say this is like, okay, I'm not saying this as an edgelord. Well, maybe I am. I am, of course. Because I hate democracy. I think it's flawed. I think it's terrible. But look at it this way. When he talks about this like classical liberal principle of democracy, blah, 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 right? And he isn't exactly a classic lib, but he's talking about more of a communitarian type of thing. You know that saying like that Barnes said in Platoon, where he says to them, if that's the way it's gonna be, and that's the way it is. Or like, even like a more of a lib example would be, what's that Haraway, or no, the xenofeminist one? If nature is unjust, just change nature, right? So that's all. Even Nietzsche would say this. Even like people on the online right that follow Nietzsche, they would say this as well, that you have to reconcile like the times that you're living in. You can't have a fantasy around it. You have to realize that we live in this time, and there's no going back. Or there's just, and I've said this too, it's dealing with the implications of where we're living at. The unique set of circumstances from which we dwell in. You know what I mean? Like, so in a way, the reason I say this is, if democracy, quote unquote, as we know it, as a principle, as this sacred thing that we have to worship, if it cannot withstand the online world, which consumes the real, the meat space, and the online become one, if democracy as a principle cannot withstand the online world, then where did that principle lead you? What use is it? Because the online is not going away anytime soon. Maybe if there's a global EMP, nuclear war, whatever, but for the time being. This is the Landian point, right? The Nick Landian point. Is that this particular form of digital technology will consume everything in its wake. And yes, it's tragic in a lot of ways. But when it comes to the flimsiness of democracy in the modern world, and the hyper-real world, if it doesn't withstand, then get rid of it. If it doesn't last, if it's so brittle that's being undermined by online posters, then guess what? It's weak. As one political visionary said, and you know the one, if someone sees a strong horse and a weak horse, everyone will naturally pick the strong horse. You know who said that. I don't have to say his name, but he truly was a visionary. I'm kidding. But maybe, unless. So anyways. Digital networks lack amphitheatrical structures of conventional mass media, which selects topics that are relevant to all of society and directs the attention of the whole population towards them. Well, I disagree because they were manipulating what is important anyways. They still try to do this. It's just that it's up to us to break that. So I'm very shocked that Byung-Chul Han is saying this. Because we all know that the media, how they lie and manipulate and they force issues that they pretend are relevant, but really it's probably irrelevant compared to what's actually going on in the world. But this is a basic point. Because of the centrifugal forces inherent to digital networks, the public sphere disintegrates into a variety of swarms, each pursuing a particular interest. As communication actions require large-scale political public spheres, this makes communicative action harder. The contemporary crisis of communicative action is also caused by social processes separate from the digital transformation of the public sphere. According to Hannah Arendt, political thinking is representative, in the sense that it invokes making present to mind the standpoints of those who are absent. Representation, the presence of the other in opinion formation, is constitutive of democracy as a discursive practice. I form an opinion by considering a given issue from different standpoints, by making present to my mind the standpoints of those who are absent. That is, I represent them. This is all just liberalism, right? We know this is not real nowadays. You know this, right? That's not real anymore. But anyways, maybe I'm just cynical, but who cares? I believe that there's a better way. I believe that there's a certain way of forming netocratic tribalism that maybe requires a bit of destruction. Maybe I'm going a bit Joker mode, but I think that oh my god, you're destroying the sinews of public life. Well, maybe they deserve to get destroyed. Look at this society. Look how demonic it is. Look where I live. Look at the country I live in, the non-country. Look how demonic it is. There are literal consumer product commercials about the MAID program. Look it up. Anyways. Democratic discourse requires the power of the imagination, of being and thinking in my own identity where actually I am not, and forming my opinion with the standpoint of other people in mind. This process of reflection that leads to the formation of an opinion, Arendt says, is truly discursive. Truly discursive. Insofar as it's mindful of the position of the other. But let's say, was it truly mindful of the position of the other, or was it the illusion of that back in the day? Maybe in the Roman Senate, but they left out minorities and women and so forth, but whatever, non-free men. The point being is that true representation, apart from the leviathan of a million voices going off at once into a cacophonous maw of black, meaty, constant white noise, it's not going to work. You always need a mediation. You always need voices to go above the masses to represent the core interests. But their argument is that this no longer exists in the digital age, that this has been blown apart, that this isn't real anymore because of those million voices vying for attention. And we're all doing it. I'm doing it right now. So there you go. So the process of reflection leads to formation of opinion. Arendt says is truly discursive insofar as it's mindful of the position of the other. But we know it's not. Without the presence of the other, my opinion is not discursive or representative, but self-absorbed, doctrinal, and dogmatic. The presence of the other is also constitutive of Habermas's concept of communicative action. And now he quotes Habermas. Quote, the concept of communicative action requires us to consider actors also as speakers and hearers who reflect to something in the objective, social or subjective world, and mutually makes validity claims that can either be accepted or disputed, Actors no longer refer directly to something in the objective, social, or subjective world. Rather, they qualify their statements about something in the world in light of the possibility that they may be disputed by other actors. Well, we kind of do that, but not really. I mean, we post Giga Chads and Soy Jacks at each other. So there you go. That's take that, Habermas. Take that. Processing directly. So this is Byung-Chul Han. Proceeding directly or straight on is not a discursive movement. It is discourse blind. Discourse is a to and fro movement, the Latin discursus meaning walking around. In discourse, we are in a positive sense distracted from our own convictions by the other. My statement or opinion acquires a discursive quality only through the voice of the other. Under conditions of communicative action, I need the other to be aware that what I say may be challenged by others. A statement that does not have the question mark hanging over it does not have a discursive character. On a meta level, our crisis of communicative action can be explained by the fact that the other is disappearing. The disappearance of the other means the end of discourse. It robs opinions of their communicative rationality. The expulsion of the other strengthens the auto-propagandistic compulsion to indoctrinate oneself with one's own ideas. Well, I mean, he does have a point there. He does have a point. We do Gooncave with our own ideas. We do, like, shut ourselves off in our little hug box, echo chambers, and that's it. We literally Gooncave with a million similar opinions to ourselves. This self-indoctrination precedes or produces self-referential info bubbles which impede communicative action. Yeah, info bubbles, hug boxes, whatever. With the development of the auto-propagandistic compulsion, discursive spaces are increasingly replaced by echo chambers in which the only voice one hears is one's own. Discourse presupposes that I can distinguish between my opinion and my identity. People who do not have this discursive ability hold fast to their opinions because they feel that their identities are threatened. Any attempt to persuade them to adopt a different opinion is therefore doomed to fail. They did not follow the other, they did not listen. Discourse, however, is a practice of listening. The crisis of democracy is first and foremost a crisis of listening. According to Eli Parissier, the public sphere is being destroyed by the algorithmic personalization of the internet. Quote, the new generation of internet filters looks at the things you seem to like, the actual things you've done, or the things that people like you like also, and tries to extrapolate. They're prediction engines. Constantly creating and refining a theory of who you are and what you'll do and want next. Together, these engines create a unique universe of information for each of us. What I've come to call a filter bubble, which fundamentally alters the way we encounter ideas and information. The longer I surf the internet, the more my filter bubble becomes filled with information that I like and reinforces my convictions. I am shown only those views of the world that conform to my own. All other information is kept outside the bubble. In the filter bubble, I am caught in an endless you loop. Y-O-U. You. Nobody TMs you, remember? That desire, that the liberation of desire is slavery, is self-bondage, remember? Nobody TMs you with the E. Michael Jones rant about the weaponization of, sexual desire and so forth. But there are points where I disagree here. There are points where I disagree that I will get into. And about that U loop, I was watching this. He's a good YouTuber, although, in this episode he admitted to being a sacrament head. If you know what I mean. The YouTuber Blind Dweller, he does, which, man, I really feel pissed that I could have done this grift, You know, I could have, not that he's a grifter. I'm not saying he's a grifter. He's a very fine YouTuber. He puts a lot of work and effort into highlighting very weird and eccentric artists. Like, he did a whole thing on Francis Bacon, Bitskinsky, very weird, like, type of content that I guess is more of an art analysis version of like, weird or strange YouTubers, like Scare Theater, Next Pro. But he does a lot of good work, and I don't know if like I'm too non-normie friendly to like for him to come on my show, but because I did this whole Theory Cell episode with my friend Sam on Francis Bacon, and it's funny because he did this one on Laurie Lipton, who is like, when it pisses you off when someone is genuinely talented, like surreally talented, but they're just like, your standard boomer liberal. That's like her. She's one of the really the best draftswoman of the century, you could say, in terms of her technique and the way that she draws these huge canvas size drawings that are very surreal and very her art has a lot of merit. But she does this whole series about social media. But the reason it pisses me off because she's basically standard, feminist, boomer liberal who like had this like big drawing on J6 and how it's evil and there's a rebel flag there. It's really funny when boomer libs make artwork that are like unintentionally based. It's like they portray us like the chud right winger as the enemy. It actually makes us look better. But anyways, it's sort of like, it's like when that one float in that one parade where it like portrayed Trump as like a god emperor. It's like, wow, you don't realize like it's not the message that you think it is. Anyways, so so that aside, and she does have a lot of very again, kind of like the conceptual artist that she is not, her polar opposite in terms of her being a hyper-realist draftswoman, and the contemporary art world, being like Laurie Simmons with her photo shoots and posing and models and so forth, same sort of quabbling. All boomer liberal women, in the art world, they have this quabbling with domesticity in the 1950s. And there's this one series she did with like these very garish looking 50s pinup women, like in the, not pinup women, but like, housewife, Leave It to Beaver, where they're like with these like surrealistic, almost Geiger-like machines in the household, which that is a commentary in terms of like how domesticity is aided by technology and by our capacity in sort of ways. It does come off as a bit steampunky, that's kind of cringe, but I understand like the sort of machinic nature of life separated from any sort of like what would they call it, like authenticity or whatever. Of course, she's like, we haven't achieved women's rights in full. Like, true women's rights aren't here yet, blah, blah, blah. And it's, of course, she does a lot of artwork about the Covidian era. And the reason I bring her up is because she did these ones about social media where it's like the infinity of screens. And there's this one where this man is naked. It's almost like the artwork you'd see in something like Serial Experiments Lane, like an anime, where there's these tubes and technology and cooling tanks and screens with social media symbols pouring out of these robotic features, and he's suspended on these, like, it's almost heavenly in a way. It's almost like a Moreau painting where he's suspended in these gangle of wires. It's sort of like Hellraiser meets Gustave Moreau. And it's very funny because I feel like this artwork, it is exploring what life is like on social media and the internet. But I feel that a true artistic exploration, a lot of boomer liberals, I notice, they will revert to a form of like nominal. What I mean by nominal, I mean like, very, not very like essential, but very on the surface level form, and not like, not everywhere at once. Like, it's not trans-historical. They'll revert to like a very nominal when it suits them. form of like curmudgeon core, like anti-technology or anti-social media, when they're like, well, people are just on their phones too much, even though I buy basically the worldview and prog ideology that can only come about through mass communication technology, or can only be manifested in such a way as the apparatus of hyper-technics, you could say. A lot of progressive ideology, and this is what Lewis Mumford observed, is that technology does, or rather telecommunications or hot and cold media, McLuhan and Mumford, says that they bring with it a certain ideology. A lot of what we're seeing now, this like, what do you even want to call it, neo-Gnostic or whatever, and some people have a problem with that, and there's other people like Twinksorg that make that thing cringe, by saying that everything is Gnostic. But really, the separation between and Byung-Chul Han is going to get to this. I'm going to read very soon, but let me, finish my rant here on Laurie Lipton. Is that a lot of this comes about only from the apparatus of hyper-technics and digital technics that we are under. Can only be expressed, this sort of the reintroduction of the mind-body problem through ideology, through politics in the hyper-modern age. That can only come about, I feel, through our relation to especially social media. But that being said, like these boomers, they have this curmudgeon core thing. Like I remember when people used to, there was the last great bandwave, not the one before the Jannies got told namaste by, Krishna Elon. But this was like a few months ago, where you would have these boomer liberals with like the blue, yellow, and the flower and the blue wave symbol, where they're like, well, it's good when people get banned on social media because you're evil and racist, but also, people just need to disconnect. It's like, you don't understand that these are the conditions we live in, that you need this. So, in my opinion, I've had, myself have had works of art that are critical of, digital technology. But I feel that, like, if someone had the skill, which I do not possess, and whatsoever, maybe I can never reach that level of skill that Laurie Lipton has, even though she's a terrible boomer liberal, second wave feminist. But, I feel like if someone were to approach it differently, I feel like, boomer liberals, even though they were indoctrinated by television, they still are like, oh, this is bad and you should log off and touch grass. It's like really strange to hear them say this. They'll revert to like almost a quasi-trad argument, especially because of Trump, because like people are too online because of the evil Trumplings and the frogs that are, trolling people. They're evil and hateful, and we should get rid of anonymity on social media, which is like another thing that Jordan Memerson wants, right? They're united. Even the boomer liberals want nothing more than if everyone was doxxed, right? So, and I'm saying this as a face myself. So anyways, this sort of curmudgeon core attitude that even boomer liberals have, they don't realize that they were indoctrinated with the apparatus of technology by television, which was even worse because it didn't give you any expression. They're definitely afraid and fearful of expression that isn't this iconic like rock star or pop star like thing, Like it's like what T777 said, where it's like they believe weird things. They don't, like, for example, they believe that because they dropped acid and they listened to Bob Dylan in their rooms and they dodged the draft, that was what ended the Vietnam War. Not that they didn't listen to Westmoreland, not the media, not bad planning, not the sort of strategy that they were using. No, it's like because they dropped acid and listened to Bob Dylan. That's what ended the Vietnam War to them. And they also like worship, these gods of rock and pop and movie stars. But anyways, my point being is that Laurie Lipton presents very interesting critiques, very highly skilled and incredibly done and incredibly surrealistic, but they're very concretized. They're almost like the Matrix in that they're too concretized critiques of it. That they're very much like, look, you're being distracted, and here's Trump. He's like a puppet master, and social media. It's like a true, I think, artist, if someone were to achieve that level of skill, could depict life through hyper-technics, through the digital world, as an exploration thing. And I think that even Bitskinsky using, before the end of his tragic end of his life, where he was redacted by one of a friend of his, or a friend of his son's, or who was trying to be a student of his, but he was mentally ill. I forget exactly. Like, it was very mysterious how Bitskinsky died. Like the motivation for that kid that he helped out redacting him. He was like 19 years old, I think. The guy that, anyways, Bitskinsky. It's very weird how he died, but he was using, and a lot of it was kind of like early internet animation. It wasn't very good, but he was using technology and the limits of it. But I feel like if you were to take fine art mediums and you were to depict life, the way that I did with my memes, trying to like do woodcuts of memes and paintings and so forth, that it's a way of sort of reconciling that. And it's, as much as I appreciate what Laurie Lipton's doing, even though I think it's not coming from a, a sound place, in my opinion. It's not based in Red Pill, in other words. It's not Scrimblow, but I think she presents a very interesting look. But at the same time, I guess when it comes to the intersection of hyper-technics and the aesthetic, there could be a work of art that is, I think, trying to depict the experience of being a hyper-online person. Not in terms of a concrete, what I mean by concrete? I mean like physically depicting these wires and channels and technology and screens and the subject being bombarded by these digital apparatuses and the body itself becoming an extension of digital simulation. But something to go beyond that. This is why Serial Experiments Lane was such a monumental work of art, in my opinion. Because it looked beyond that. It looked beyond the sort of grug brain, like, it's become a meme now, like Black Mirror, glass shatters, right? To look beyond that, to look at something that is much more substantial and to actually examine the workings of what life could potentially be if the digital, if hyper-technics does not go away. If sort of digital media is a force that kind of is like a Nick Landian, like all-consuming, accelerative entity that we have scarcely little control over. I think the artists of the future could potentially not embrace the negative aspects of it, but certainly find ways to reconcile the truth of our reality with higher principles. Same with that meme that I posted about, fashion, not, vintage fashion, not vintage values. And I reverted it. I had a picture of Shodan where it's like, no, vintage values, not vintage aesthetics, right? So that's amazing, right? Like, I think that's the goal of all fascism and futurism, really. At the end of the day, archaeofuturism is not vintage aesthetics, but vintage values. But, well, moving on.